nanoHUB.org.
Online simulation and more for nanotechnology.
What I'd like to do today is tell you a little bit about data science and how we can all learn about data science and share resources using nanoHUB. Okay, so what's data science? What's machine learning? Well, so data science and machine learning is learning from data, learning by example, the way humans learn, and without the need of rules of underlying models. And we're all interacting with data science and machine learning in our daily lives. We are, for example, when you interact with digital assistants like Siri or the Google Assistant, that's driven by machine learning, by artificial intelligence. The recommendations for what to watch on YouTube or Netflix or what to buy next in Amazon, those are all driven by artificial intelligence and the type of tools that I will introduce in the lecture. And importantly, the tools that you will be able to get your hands on and actively run in the hands-on part of the seminar. So let me give you another example that I think is very exciting. There's a product from Google called AlphaZero that learned how to play chess and Go and shogi by playing with itself. So what you don't have to do is program the rules of chess or Go. The program plays and gets better and better with practice. And you probably know that these type of programs today can beat the best human competitors. One of the cool things with AlphaZero is that the same program could learn chess, shogi, and Go. The same architecture, the same brain could learn all of these different games by example. Now, these type of tools apply not just to our everyday life, commerce, and games, but also in the field of STEM, which is what brings us all here. Science Magazine, it's one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world, selected as the 2021 Breakthrough of the Year an artificial intelligence-powered model that can predict the shape of proteins. Okay, so proteins are very large molecules, and the 3D structure of these proteins, how they fold and what type of shapes they take, determine their function. And so understanding those is critical to understand life and also to understand disease. And this has been a problem, a challenge that has been outstanding for 50 years, understanding how proteins, these very long chains, fold and form 3D structures. And for the first time, the best predictions that we have for protein structures are now driven by artificial intelligence. These are the three-dimensional structures of some of these properties. This particular case is a protein called Tango2, and some of the points that are highlighted there as spheres are pathogenic mutations of these proteins. So what are the components? What are the elements to enable the use of data science and artificial intelligence in STEM, in science and engineering? Well, the first thing to do data science is we need data. So as a community, we need to learn how to acquire, handle, and share data more effectively. And there's a relatively recent effort towards making data what we call fair, which is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. The data in science and in STEM fields, it's very expensive to acquire. We often have to run very complex experiments that take a long time. And so collecting the data is very expensive. And then not making that data available to the community in ways that are easy to ingest really hinders progress. Over the last decade or so, there's been a range of infrastructures that have been developed to better handle data. Okay, and these are some examples of platforms where researchers can upload their data and other researchers can automatically, using machines, query the data and extract the data that they need. And we're going to see with an example how that works in a few minutes. Okay, so what can you do once you have the data? There are many things that you can do. One class of problems that can be solved is to develop predictive models. And we are all familiar in engineering and in science what we mean by predictive models. In the field of machine learning, that's called supervised learning, which means having a bunch of inputs analyzed some way and predicting an output, maybe a quantity, a property that we're interested in, or the performance of a device. So that's one type of problems. Another type of problem is called unsupervised learning. And unsupervised learning is also very widely used in STEM fields. Is all about finding patterns hidden in the data that may not be apparent to the human, to the naked eye. And so one of the things that I'd like to do throughout the presentation is I'm going to show examples of applications of data science in STEM. You all have different backgrounds. It might be a good idea for you to think about, okay, in my own field, what type of problems could be categorized in this framework? Okay, so we can create predictive models. We can find patterns using unsupervised learning. The other type of problem that we can solve that's actually very exciting, and this is the example we will run together in nanoHUB, is using a technique called active learning for design of experiments. So can I use my data and these models to select the best possible experiments to run next so that I can arrive at my solution as fast as possible? Kind of in a way similar to how Amazon recommends to you what to buy next. Imagine having a system that if you're in the lab, it tells you what experiment to perform next. So let's move on. So let's start by talking a little bit about supervised learning. So as I mentioned, supervised learning is when we want to predict a property, an output. So we have a bunch of inputs and we're interested in an output. And we don't necessarily know how those inputs relate to that output, but we have a lot of data to train our models with. And so this is, for example, an example of this is what I talked to you before in terms of protein folding. So this is from one of the papers that was highlighted by Science Magazine. And what they do in this paper is they start with a sequence of amino acids. Those are the inputs to the model. The model is a very complicated set of neural networks and other types of models, neural networks of different kinds. And they do a lot of processing and back propagation and moving forward and finding patterns. And then the output is the full atomic model for the protein, okay? And again, if we understand the shape of the proteins, we can design drugs that target specific disease. We can understand mutations that can cause disease. Is a really ginormous scientific challenge. So that's an example. Another cool example is the identification, the analysis of images, retinal images, to diagnose retinal disease. And it turns out that machine learning tools can be taught, by example, to analyze scans, eye scans, and diagnose and refer patients based on various diseases. And for the first time, these tools are as accurate as expert clinicians. An advantage of these tools is that they can perform the analysis at a fraction of the time than as compared to humans. Now, these are cutting-edge applications. I like to compare these to a Formula One car, okay? Big resources, big computers, super experts running these tools and putting these together, really the bleeding edge. Just like none of us can sit and drive a Formula One car, you need a special driver and special mechanics. This is the cutting edge of science. However, these underlying tools are available for us to use, and we'll talk about that. And so supervised learning, inputs to outputs, you're probably all familiar with regression, okay? So at the end of the day, when we're doing supervised learning, we're doing a sort of regression where we want to correlate the inputs to the outputs. And this model, this black box that's in the middle, could be various things. It could be a very simple function like a polynomial. We all know about linear fit, curve fitting. That's an example of learning from data. If we have physics-based models that have parameters that require calibration, that's also, if we calibrate that based on data, that could also be considered supervised learning and machine learning. But typically, when we talk about machine learning, what we're referring to is having a model that's not a simple polynomial or a physics-based model, but what's called a universal approximator, like artificial neural networks or random forests. So these are models that can approximate any function between the inputs and the outputs. If a relationship between inputs and outputs exists, and you have enough data, this neural network will always find the mapping, as long as you can make it large enough and complex enough, like we saw that architecture for the protein folding problem. So we're not going to look at those very complex architectures that have millions and tens of millions of parameters, but let's look inside a really tiny baby artificial neural network. Okay, so if I open the black box and I look what's inside, what I'll show you is that what's inside is actually very simple. So each of these little circles is an artificial neuron. And just like biological neurons, an artificial neuron gets inputs, processes those inputs, and generates an output, okay? So let's go through a little bit of math because it's really, really simple. And that's all you really need to know about neural networks to understand how they work. Okay, so let's single out this neuron that I'm calling A1, artificial neuron 1. The inputs is the previous layer. So let's come up with, let's use a concrete example. Let's say I want to predict the melting temperature of a material, and my inputs are E, the Young's modulus, and rho, the density, okay? So this first neuron gets a signal from E and a signal for rho, and those signals, there's how strong the connection is between these neurons is given by these weights, W1 and W2. So the output of neuron 1 is the inputs E and rho, the density, times the weights, W1 and W2, plus a bias. Every neuron has a bias. Those are all the inputs. You apply a function that's called the activation function, and that provides the output of neuron 1. Neuron 2 works exactly the same way, except that there's different weights that connect E and rho to the second neuron, W3 and W4. And the output layer, the melting temperature, is another function, the activation function of the two inputs to this last neuron, which are A1 and A2, and their own weights, W1 and W2. So when you train a neural network, what you're doing is finding the weights, those yellow numbers, and the biases, the blue numbers. That's all there is to it. You bring in a lot of data, and you train the neuron to try to reproduce your data as accurately as possible. The layer between the inputs, or the layers between the inputs and the outputs, are called hidden layers. And this particular example that I'm giving you is a tiny neuron with just one hidden layer with two neurons. A universal approximator, these neurons that solve protein folding, have many, many layers, complex connections between the layers. The layers are very wide, and that's called deep neural networks, because it has lots of hidden layers separating the inputs and the outputs. But each neuron works exactly like these ones. And so when we're talking about these smaller type of neurons, type of neural networks, you can think of this as the Prius of machine learning. And while none of us is capable of driving a Formula One car, and to do those type of cutting edge problems in machine learning, you have to be an advanced researcher, have advanced resources. We can all drive a Prius, which means that we can benefit from these tools in our own research. And that's what I'm going to try to show you today. So those were examples of supervised learning. Let me give you an example of unsupervised learning. And remember, in unsupervised learning, I'm not interested in making a quantitative prediction, predicting a quantity. I want to understand patterns. I want to understand the structure of my data, find clusters, do dimensionality reduction, find trends. And we all have these type of problems in our STEM fields. And again, I encourage all of you to think about, as I'm speaking, about possible applications in your own fields. So let me give you an example of unsupervised learning. What you see there is the type of work that we do in my group, a molecular dynamic simulations where we solve for the motion of every atom. And this is an energetic material, an energetic molecule that's decomposing and reacting and forming all sorts of bonds and breaking bonds and forming other molecules. So if you analyze the data, what you realize is that there's a lot going on. I have every atom can make all sorts of different bonds. There's a wide range of bonding environments, and they evolve in time. So I actually, in this particular case, there's 280 bonding environments, and from the simulation, I can extract their time evolution. So as a human, trying to understand, maybe model the time evolution of 280 species or bonding environments is an enormous challenge. And creating models like that would be computationally very intensive. It's just not very doable. And so we can use unsupervised learning, particularly a technique called non-negative matrix factorization in this example, to extract the main collective variables that describe the majority of the stuff that's going on with the fewest possible variables, okay? in this particular case, these 280 curves on the left can be described very accurately with just 3 components, okay? And very importantly, these components have a physical meaning. You can see that there's one component that's decreasing very quickly. These are chemical reactions, right? So these are the reagents being consumed and disappearing in time. You see the blue line that goes up and then down. These are called intermediates, species that form, and then they're used to make the final products, so they disappear, and the final products are in green, okay? So automatically, using these tools, the machine learning can analyze this very complex simulation with lots of dimensions and tell me what are the most important variables that control the dynamics of my system. There are many other applications of unsupervised learning that you're probably familiar with. Recommendation engines tend to use trends using unsupervised learning, feature extraction and anomaly detection, lots of different applications that use this. And again, I'm sure in your field, you can come up with examples, cool examples where you could use these techniques to solve interesting problems. Okay, so now we're experts in machine learning, okay? So let's see how we can put it all together and use it to solve engineering problems. So let's say I want to discover something. I'm a material scientist. So let's say I want to discover a new material with certain properties. How can I use machine learning to do this, discover this new material in the most optimal way, which means spending the least money and in the shortest possible time? So there's a technique called active learning that I'll describe very quickly. You start by collecting all the existing data on your problem, okay? This could be prior publications, books, tables. You collect all the data. With that data, you create a predictive model like the ones we were talking about before. And then you use this predictive model, this artificial intelligence, to think ahead and try to predict what will happen if you run all of the possible experiments that you could run next. And these artificial neural networks are very fast to compute, so they can explore thousands of possibilities in a microsecond. And they can rank them for you. They can tell you what experiment you'd be best at running next. So then you go and you query your source of information. You run the experiment, or maybe run a simulation. And you try this new experiment. You're either done because you found the material with the properties that you wanted, or you add the material to your database and you iterate once more, okay? And you keep iterating until you find the material that you're after. And this is called active learning because you're not exploring randomly or blindly exploring space. You're honing in on the properties, on the materials that are most likely to result in the property that you're interested in. Let me give you an example and we'll jump in nanoHUB. This is the work of one of my students, Juan Carlos Verduzco, and he's interested in finding oxides for lithium-ion, so solid electrolytes for lithium-ion batteries, okay? So Juan Carlos and other students spent about 3 months collecting every piece of information ever published about this class of materials, that we're interested in. And we collected all that information in a table. There's about 100 published data points in this case. They're called garnet oxides, and our interest is finding the garnet with the highest lithium-ion conductivity, because we want to use this for a lithium-ion battery application. So we're going to do a pretend study in the computer. Of course, we can go to the lab and run an experiment in the nanoHUB demo. So we're going to do it all in the computer. So here's how we're going to do. Each of these dots represents one of these data points. And the one here at the very top, this is the best performer. This is the one that we'd like to find. So to show and exercise this active learning loop, we're going to start with 10 data points that are these 10 black dots. So those are, I'm going to pretend that I only have access to those 10. And I'm going to train a model only with those 10 and hide the remaining 90 data points. With the model, I'm going to evaluate all of the remaining 90 possible experiments, and I'm going to rank them in terms of how good or bad the model thinks those materials will be. And then I have a decision to make. Which of all of these do I want to try next? So you could say, well, it might make sense to pick this one because this is the one where the model predicts to have the highest mean average value. Some of you might think, well, why don't we try this other one where the mean plus the uncertainty is the highest? And another person could say, hey, let's try that one because we know very little about that material. Our uncertainties are huge. And so maybe there's something interesting there. All of those are valid approaches, and they're called acquisition functions, different acquisition functions, to decide what experiment to do next. Once I decide which one to do next, I add it to the database and keep iterating until we find the best performer. Okay, so now I hope you're all ready. We're going to jump in nanoHUB, and I would invite you to do this with me if you can. And if not, this presentation is going to be recorded and you can come back later and do it by yourself. And so the URL is nanohub.org/tools/Citrin tools. I hope you can see that at the very top of my browser. It's also in the handouts. And once you're there on the main tool page, you can launch the tool with this button. And to run tools, you have to log in nanoHUB. You can get a free account. You can log in with your Google credentials. And what's happening as we wait is nanoHUB is launching the tool, and nothing runs in your computer. nanoHUB provides cloud computing services. So all the computing is done in our computers, and you just see the results on your web browser. If you looked at the pre-workshop instructions that we shared, we're going to extract the data, download the data from a repository called Citrination, and we need an API key. API stands for Application Programming Interface. And that's kind of like your password. So we don't want to share that. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second and upload my API key and then share again. You see that it says success. I uploaded my key and I'm ready to go. So we're going to do the second of these examples, machine learning guided design of ceramic oxides. We click on it, and this is what you see here is called a Jupyter notebook. That's a very popular and powerful tool for interactive computing. It's very, very popular in data science. And what's nice about Jupyter Notebook is that it combines this rich text with actual live code. So if you're following, and I hope some of you are, you will be able to run the tool with me. And to run these code cells, you can see here that this is code we're importing a bunch of libraries that we need. Nothing very interesting, just importing libraries for machine learning. And to run these cells, you have to click Shift-Enter or click here on the Run button. While the cell is running, you'll see this little asterisk on the tool, and when it's done, it's going to show you the number. So we haven't done anything. We just uploaded a bunch of libraries that are needed. That's one of the nice things of running with nanoHUB. Everything is pre-installed and ready to go. Now, the next thing is we're going to download our data from C3 Nation. So my students spend about 3 months combing through the literature to get all of this data. Now, this data is already made available to the community, and it's fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So anyone else with this amount of time, how long did it take? Maybe 5 minutes, we can collect all of the data that took us 3 months of combing the literature to do. So this is the data. This is called a pandas data framework, similar to Excel in Python. And you can see that we have a bunch of properties of all of these oxides that we're interested in, including the ionic conductivity. This is the property that we want to maximize. So we define a function. We do a little bit of cleaning. Okay, I'm going a little fast just to be mindful of time, but we're just manipulating the data. We are filtering the data to keep the stuff that we are interested in. We remove some duplicates in the data, and we extract what's called descriptors to describe materials. Instead of using just the composition, we can use properties of the material as descriptors for each one of those materials. And then we divide the data into a training set and a testing set, and we're going to try some regression models, okay? I mentioned neural networks in the past. This is how you create a neural network, okay? And it's actually very simple using a program called Keras. Each one of these layers tells the hidden layers. This is the input layer, hidden layer. This is the number of neurons. This is what activation function we want to use, all the things that we've discussed, and a few other details. But it's few lines of code. You can actually get a neural network set up, and then you train it, okay? We're training as we speak. This is running right this moment in nanoHUB, and it tells you the accuracy as a function of the training steps, and then you can visualize how good or bad your model is. This compares our model, the predicted value of the conductivity, with the experimental value. And you can see that our neural network is not doing so great, okay? Some materials we do okay, being right on the line would be perfect, but there's big deviations in some materials. And neural networks are not great when you have not a whole lot of data, okay? So unlike these other examples we were talking about, in material science or chemistry, we often don't have a lot of data. So random forests are another type of model, and don't have the time to discuss them in detail, but they tend to perform better when you don't have a whole lot of data. And you can see that this random forest model stays closer to the line, okay? All right, now I have a model, and what I want to do is go and do the active learning loop. So I'm going to select a few, 10 of those 100 data points, do the initial training, and do the loop where we iterate, decide what simulation to run next, use an acquisition function to decide what experiment to reveal next, and that's it. So I'm running the cells. So we're going to pick 10 initial structures. We're going to create a model for those 10 structures. And then we're going to start the active learning loop. So we have 50 steps. We're going to try 50 times. Remember, we have 90 experiments to explore. And we're going to create different lists based on these different acquisition functions that I was describing. Do I go for the highest mean value, the highest mean plus standard deviation plus uncertainty? And I'm just running this cell. This takes a little bit of time, right? We have to loop over, train a model, select the next experiment, reveal that next experiment, and keep doing that for a little bit. But in a few minutes, this will be done, and we will be able to explore our results. Okay, the tool has finished. And we can now visualize the results, okay? The tool has its own visualization, but let me show you go back to the presentation and show you the results right here. So these are the 100 data points. Focus first on the black dots. These are the experimentally reported in the literature values of the ionic conductivity as a function of time, of publication time. And you can see how with time we're getting better. The ionic conductivity in general increases, but we're going kind of slowly, okay? In about 15 years, we've improved to some degree, but we're still far away from the liquid electrolytes that we use today in batteries. So it'd be good to be able to speed this up. Well, what we're showing here in red, these are the machine learning selected experiments that I was showing you in the tool. So we start with the first 10 samples. These are the first 10 published papers. And then instead of going with how the community made decisions, the black dots, we at every time that there's a paper, instead of putting the value that the community found, we put the value of the material that we selected using machine learning, okay? So the first experiment we try is not very good. That material is not very good, but we get better. We learn because we learn by experience, right? Remember data science. And so you see that very quickly we get much better, and we start exploring mostly good conductors. And we get to the highest conducting oxide many years before the community actually found it, okay? And typically we find, us and other researchers, that you can reduce the number of experiments to about 1/3, okay? And so you can really cut down on the number of experiments you have to do to achieve your design goal. So let me take the last few minutes to describe the underlying infrastructure in nanoHUB and how you can use it to learn about data science and other topics, but also how you can use it to share your own material, codes, and data with your own community. So what nanoHUB is trying to do is take these research-grade tools that take a lot of expertise to run. Those are the Formula One cars, right, of simulation, and make them available to our end users who are not computational experts, but they're domain experts. Maybe they are, or students, maybe they're instructors, they may be experimentalists, they may be students who don't want to spend years developing the expertise to run these directly. So what we try to do is connect these research-grade products with the users who can actually make use of them to design better products, better materials, better chemicals. And so what we do is we take these tools and we turn them into apps or into machine learning workflows like the one I showed you that where everything is pre-installed, you don't have to worry about the hardware, installing software, making sure everyone is connected. We do all of that for you. All you have to do is be able to write a few lines of Python code. And we also have desktop and mobile apps. So we train these Formula One cars into Priuses that we can all kind of drive and be more innovative in our own fields without having to have a PhD in computational tools or cutting edge data science tools. So what's nanoHUB? We have over 700 tools, just like the one you used. This is a community-driven infrastructure. People can contribute their own tools. We have 1,800 plus contributors. Every year, over 22,000 users run simulations in nanoHUB, okay? Simulation users. Just like if you perform one of those simulations, you're counted there. We run over 1 million simulations for our users, and we have 2 million visitors to the site. And what these visitors come for is not just the simulations, but all the supplementary, complementary material, educational material associated with the tools. So in terms of data science, which is what we're here for, there's two main resources in nanoHUB. There's what we call hands-on modules on data science, and we also run a workshop series on data science. So the modules are for beginners. They're designed for undergraduate students, folks who are beginning with data science, and the workshops are more researchy ones, and they cover more advanced topics. All of these are recorded, and specifically the learning modules, which is the way to start, they all consist of a lecture, pre-recorded lecture, a set of hands-on step-by-step tutorials so that you can actually run each of the simulations, and the homework assignment, okay? And the idea is that they are designed to be easily adoptable in an existing classroom, okay? Because all the material is pre-packaged. And as I've said multiple times, think about examples in your own field, and what examples would you like to use in your own classes, and we will be happy to work with you and try to make those examples available. These tools are very popular. There's thousands of users who run it every year and benefit from these tools. So I would encourage, if you're an instructor or if you're a grad student and you have interesting ideas, to share them with your community through nanoHUB. And doing that is very easy. There's a publication process. If you go to that page, the Why Publish page, it walks you through the steps, similar to publishing a paper. And once you publish a tool like the one you've been using, each of those tools have a DOI, a digital object identifier, so that they're findable and discoverable. And also they're indexed by Web of Science as actual data publications. So you can get usage stats and citations. So we try to provide incentives and reward people who are willing to share their data and their material to help the community. And I'll finish with a few final thoughts. First of all, so data science is becoming ubiquitous in STEM fields, either predictive models or unsupervised learning or active learning. I can almost guarantee that regardless of your field, there's applications, use of data science. There are many more applications, obviously, that I didn't cover and examples. Fair data, making the workflows and the actual data that we need to use these type of tools findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable is critical to speed up innovation. So next students like Juan Carlos don't have to spend months combing through the literature. The data should be available electronically and discoverable. These are powerful tools for everyone, okay? I think a common misconception is that data science is for computational geeks, that if you're an experimentalist, you don't have to worry about data science. I think that's a big mistake, and because we all deal with data. And so if you produce data, if you analyze data, then data science is for you. And I think these tools are critical to speed up innovation and to do good work. And to do that, we really need to educate our students and the current workflow on data science and machine learning. And we really need hands-on examples like what I showed you today, so that we can educate our students and our colleagues. And again, I would invite you to think about problems in your own field and come up with solutions, learn about data science with our tools, email us, and it'd be nice to create a community-driven set of resources to introduce our students to data science. And with that, I'll stop. And I would like to thank everyone for participating in the workshop. Thank you very much. Adrian or Adrienne asks, was the data from the published literature gathered using other ML learning tools? That's a very good question. It wasn't. And there are big efforts to create ML machine learning tools that can actually basically read papers and extract data from papers. And there's been, I think, mixed success. It's really very hard to figure out how to decode papers. Sometimes the data that you care about is in the caption of a table, sometimes it's in the text. And so it's a challenge. So we did it with students, and that's very time consuming. Someone asks, were the 10 initial values used to train the network completely random, or is there some analysis needed to select the proper values? Very good question too. We did multiple things. If you read our paper, we did 10 different random selections, and we averaged the results, and we more or less get always the same results. The example that I showed with the two curves in black and in red, the 10 that we used were the 10 first ever published experiments, right? Like if you were there in 2000 whatever, when the 10th paper appeared, you could have done this and selected the subsequent ones using active learning. Who decides how far is too far? Ethically speaking, so without invading the user's privacy. So that's an interesting question. I'm going to talk about science, okay? We can discuss other areas later on. In science, we deal with data that has been made public. So the data that we extract is from papers that are in the open literature. So we do not do any research with users, like for example, nanoHUB users. We analyze nanoHUB users' behavior just to improve our services, but all we know is anonymized data about what users run, how many simulations, but that's all we do. In the research arena, this is all publicly available data, no privacy concerns there. Somebody interested in applying ML to their future research. What do you think are the biggest barriers to entry for the topic? I have no experience with Python. How do you suggest we start and improve our coding literacy? That's an awesome question, Sebastian. Let me point you to a resource. These are the machine learning modules. They're all in the context of engineering and science, so it's something that most of you should appreciate. Maybe it's not your specific field, but it's not applied mathematics. And they all have a recorded lecture, hands-on tutorial, and homework. And they're organized based on knowledge and skills, okay? So you can see which modules helps you develop what skills. There is an initial tutorial on Python. And so if you're completely unfamiliar with Python, this is a good idea to start with. And this is a resource that we put together that'll show you an introduction, very simple introduction of Python using Jupyter notebooks, doing simple plots, moving data around, simple tasks. And there's more material coming in nanoHUB, and of course there's a lot of material on the web. So if you do intro Python, understanding these codes is not super hard. So in my mind, a good way of learning how to program is starting with one of these programs and just learning just enough so that you can follow the instructions. Okay, this is the basic Python programming. So that's my recommendation. Okay, so I think you can teach yourself enough Python, and going through these exercises, running through the homework assignments, they are organized in a way that they get a little bit harder as you go along. So there's homework assignments that will show you how to do it. And what I would recommend is try this. If you get stuck, send me an email, okay? And I'll try to do my best to answer. And we would like to be able to put together a set of resources where folks can learn about data science. It's always good to have a mentor, right? To have a professor that you can work with or a colleague. But we want to put together as many resources for the community as we can and make them free so that everyone can learn. There's lots of opportunities in research experience for undergraduate RU programs or URE programs. We run one every summer. So there's lots of cool opportunities if you want to learn to program. I have a question about data curation. Who measures the quality of the data, even published data? That's a very good question. So that's from Marcelo. So here's my take on it. In principle, the reviewers, the referees who review the paper for peer review are the first barrier, right? Now, sometimes reviewers don't do a good job, or the authors often don't provide enough information to actually make sure everything is done correctly. And so there's obviously erroneous data in the literature. There's typos and there's just bad experiments. One of the interesting things of using machine learning is that when you create a model with the data, if there's data that's bad, usually you can tell, because that data is an outlier. The model cannot explain it. The data is inconsistent with everything else that has been published. So one of the applications that I mentioned of unsupervised learning is anomaly detection. And that's exactly the case when you have bad data. And so that's what it is. Of course, there are companies who make a living out of curating data and creating private databases that are curated and have a higher level of standard. But as long as we all in our labs, if we make our data available, then these outliers are very easy to identify because you don't have to do one at a time. What major challenges were faced in the creation of nanoHUB? So from Carolina, many challenges. So nanoHUB it's an effort. nanoHUB has been up for about 20 years, actually 20 years, from 2002. I've been involved with it since 2005 when I joined Purdue. At the beginning, when we started, not me personally, but the team had to create the whole infrastructure. Okay, now cloud computing is there. There's Google Colab and Gmail. When we started, there wasn't even Gmail. So cloud computing, having access through a web to a sophisticated software in the back didn't exist. So lots of challenges. And throughout the years, the challenges kept evolving, right? So the challenges now are, how do we make tools like these? How do we take a Formula One car that requires a PhD to run and it's developed only for experts? How do we make it available to domain experts so that they can design new products and whatnot? That's not very easy. How do we wrap around complex codes and make it available to the masses? How do we bring these sophisticated tools to undergraduate students? That is a challenge, and we have a big team in nanoHUB working on various aspects, from the computational side, the site needs to work, and middleware and hardware, to marketing, to people like Aaron, who help us spread the word when we have an event like this and we have people attend it. So is human bias a concern when preparing neural networks? If so, how can this be avoided? It's absolutely possible. So you as a researcher, you create the network and you can bias it, just like you can bias any model. Okay. The key bias, and if I understand your question, it can be interpreted in more than one way, but in science or in the application of artificial intelligence to societal problems, marketing and whatnot, there's two aspects. One is the neural network itself, whether the neural network is biased, and the other one is whether the data is biased. And so more often than not, in science, the data is biased, has been biased. And so there are very famous examples, infamous examples in science, where the data came from a group of people who looked a lot like me. And that data was not representative of a broader cross-section of the population. So that happens in medicine, for example. And so it's not necessarily that the model is biased, but the model sees a biased subset of the data and can then not pick up other clues. So that happens, and it's a big concern. But there's also a lot of work going on trying to address those things. And again, the site is open. You all can contribute, and you all can launch Jupyter and start playing with it and create your own tool, upload your own data and your own examples that you're interested in, and have fun with it, and then publish a tool that's like a real publication. Are the tools available to use for general purposes? For example, if we were to do molecular simulations, are the programs divided by phase or type of materials? Or is the LAMP software, for example, available to you? So the answer is yes. So LAMPS is available to use, and there are various tools that run LAMPS. And the tools do different things with LAMPS. There's a generic LAMPS tool. It's called the LAMPS tool, one word, and you can run any LAMPS job that you want. You can also launch Jupyter and run LAMPS right there. But we also create these apps that's a nice GUI where you can run a specific LAMPS job for a specific purpose very easily without having to understand the input language of LAMPS, which is a molecular dynamics code. So it depends on what you want to do. And if the tool that you want doesn't exist, maybe you can create it, Eric. Angelo, have you considered to make these programs with GUI and for scripts in Jupyter Notebook, or is it better to have it as in the browser? We have considered creating little GUIs, and we're working on that. These types of data science workflows, it's harder to create a simple GUI, but we're trying. Okay, so the short answer is we're trying. The best I can offer you right now is those types of examples that I showed you where you have to see a few lines of Python code. But we're trying to avoid that. I do think, to be honest, learning a little bit of Python to be able to do things that are a little bit more sophisticated than what you can do with a point and click type of approaches is very valuable for STEM people. I don't think you have to be a Formula One driver, right? I don't think you need to be a super expert on Python, but knowing how to run a few libraries with Python, knowing how to do a query with Python, I think it's going to be, in a few years, either Python or whatever replaces it, it's going to be almost a necessity for a lot of jobs. I could be wrong, but I think it's going to be knowing how to do these type of exercises that we're talking about, knowing a little bit about data science, to me, is going to be like today, being able to run Word and Excel, okay? I am old enough that when I was a grad student, most professors did not know how to use a word processor because they were not very common. Certainly, they didn't know how to use a spreadsheet, right? And today, you can't imagine an engineer graduating from college and not know how to use Excel. It's unthinkable. I believe in 10 years, it's going to be unthinkable for someone to graduate with a degree in STEM and not know the basics of machine learning and data science. Okay, whether that's Python in 10 years, I don't know, but having that knowledge of how to write a little script, how to make a query, how to get data in bulk, okay? With one line of Python, I can query and get 60,000 data points for oxides in 5 seconds, okay? And so that gives you such an advantage over having to do things with point and click. Or maybe it's point and click, but under the hood, you have these powerful tools that I think it's going to be very, very important. So if I can give you a recommendation to all of you is take data science seriously, learn it to the degree that you can, and I think you'll benefit from doing that, regardless of your field. Okay, I have one in Spanish.
Yeah,
¿Por qué
I'm
usan
just the
Python en
messenger.
otro lenguaje como MATLAB? ¿Cuál es la ventaja de usar Python sobre otros lenguajes? So that's a very good question. So we use Python and Python in Jupyter because the majority of the data science work, machine learning work is in Python. Now, if you launch Jupyter in nanoHUB, you can also run MATLAB through Jupyter. Okay, you can run a MATLAB kernel. And we also have a MATLAB, we have MATLAB in nanoHUB. And a few hours ago, earlier today, we had a very nice seminar by a person from MathWorks, the company that makes MATLAB, on using MATLAB in nanoHUB. And maybe Aaron can put a link to the MATLAB group, and you can go check it out. That seminar was also recorded and will be made available. So I think Python, there's more developers, okay, in Python than in MATLAB, but it does depend on your application. I think MATLAB is very popular for lots of applications. It's very powerful. It's a preference to a very large degree. MATLAB, of course, is a commercial tool, right? So you can actually run MATLAB for free in nanoHUB without a license, but that's because we have a special agreement with them. All right, well, thank you very much for participating and for the questions. I hope this was useful. Bye, everyone. Thank you.